So at the the first problem is data, and I was talking to somebody else about this, but carrots and sticks to encourage people to use best practices for data management, including data models. Because as soon as you pass that barrier to entry, and on the one hand, it's good news. Somebody's already done a lot of hard work figuring out a decent parcel coding scheme for you. Yes, you have to learn it, so that's the barrier to entry. You have to know that it exists, which is the bigger barrier to entry. But once we start getting more things coded in that fashion, it starts to be a bigger ecosystem of compatible data. And then the private sector can start filling in models, for instance, for erosion that are going to work across counties. And then all of a sudden they have a market because there's 2,500 counties instead of each one being custom bespoke software. So I mean, one of the challenges in our profession is everything's been broken up into very small jurisdictions that do everything their own way. In IT terms, that makes it impossible to get to economies of scale. Yeah, Jack has figured it out for the generic software tool, but then the real cost of implementing GIS is still obvious, right? That's a big, heavy piece of it. And then the back-end piece, how do we get interoperable metrics? I think that is likely to start coming up with web services, I have to say. So I've thought about it a lot and about different approaches to doing it. And I think as long as data are kind of parked on somebody's machine off in a corner, there's not a lot of incentive to making things repeatable and to publishing them as web services. It's just not. I mean, models are hard to construct, and they require a lot of user knowledge and experience to operate. So all the incentives are on that being done, squirreled away somewhere. The ability to relatively easily publish web services, it's still vestigial, right? I mean, other people will tell you it's been in the software for a few years, but you know, when it really works well, it'll be a couple years down the road. But I do think that once that ability is widespread, citizenry is going to demand that this plan or that plan account for its effect on their issue of interest. I've seen it already in Boston, where the bicycle coalition just torpedoed the general plan of Cambridge because it neglected bikes. Frankly, they deserved that. They should have known better, but it was an interest group that said, you know, you guys have, you know, there was, I forget what, 50 people killed in bike accidents in Cambridge last year. What are you doing about that in your general plan? And the answer was, we didn't think about that. Not a good answer. So I think as citizen activists get the ability to evaluate plans online and to pressure from those directions, they'll put different things on the agenda that will essentially get to the kind of geodesign ecosystem I was talking about. It's not, I don't think there's a magic dictator that's going to make this happen easily. I think it's going to be probably bottom-up pressure from those issues. And then I hope the vendors, and that's why I'm talking about the issue, but people that make models start to realize the value of interoperability so that they don't need to be expert in everything. And there are clearly, as I mentioned, the integrated planning firms that make their living by being expert in everything, but even them behind the scenes realize they're strong in this, weak in that. So when I was talking to Breed at the Geodesign conference about trust for public lands, my suggestion at that conference was, look, let's pairwise figure out at least one other person that's presenting at the Geodesign conference whose stuff we'd like to use and we can contribute something back to. And so I committed to doing that for Trust for Public Lands with our software, which does species impact assessment, but doesn't take into account public lands. So you know, that's a kind of bottom-up model, just to try and do things pairwise. Pairwise interoperability. When I've done these large projects, I guess the reason I came to that solution is I've done a lot of large projects where you do this master diagram up front of everything that needs to feed into everything to get your policy answer. And in the end, you know, you get one meeting or two to get that thing established. But once you do, there are interfaces that naturally come from that diagram. We've got to get our parcels data into impervious cover. And it's a natural pairing to get the parcel assessor people and the remote sensing analyst or orthophoto coder or whatever. You know, they know then that that's their job to cover that interface. And they can go off on their own and figure out how the heck they're going to do that. And it's a reasonable way to build a complex system is by decomposing it into pairwise things that need to be solved. So I think a lot of the interoperability, grand visions aside, has to be solved pairwise. And I think there are not that many elements in the geodesign toolkit right now that they can't be solved that way. So I just keep making this pitch to all of the different vendors and different contexts. So I've gone to Nature Conservancy and said the same thing. You guys are doing urban growth modeling inside Vista. That's dumb. Why don't you let people that do urban growth modeling for a living do the urban growth modeling? You guys are biological experts. You'll win by actually just being able to use better urban growth modeling, again, as a web service on tap. And I pointed them, in that case, to USGS that has a good one. But I think that needs, I don't know if that'll just happen naturally over time, but it's a little bit what I said in my talk. I mean, the early challenge was integration, so nothing worked together at all. And so how do you get out of that box? You make some little container that you control the universe and everything works together. And if it's small potatoes development, that's the only solution. But as this stuff gets more widespread, I think there's market logic then to having repeatable models that are distributed. But I don't know when the tipping point is going to be on that. I know it's not yet, but I think that it's coming relatively soon enough for us to plan for.
Yeah.
That
microphone. You're gonna. I've got one. It's about university connection here. One of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit was, and I know Carl writes quite a bit about how if he was king for a day, how he would organize university. But I'm wondering, with a term like geodesign that cuts across the traditional reductionist science, how a community partnership with the university can really start to invest in building up a praxis of knowledge, a praxis of geodesign, which is, to me, praxis means a practical application of knowledge in practice, right? That's why I love the community practice thing. So I'm wondering what you think about that from a standpoint of what a university like this might mean to the idea we keep an interest group going in geodesign. How do we partner with the university?
I think a lot of the design professions are actually very used to design integration, and so is engineering. So if you break it apart, it's not something that new. Architects for centuries have had to deal with, a variety of factors coming in, the same as planners and same as engineers. So, I mean, the one thing is to recognize that universities have been solving these problems, and the professional practice community in particular has always been in charge of integrating. So it's a useful form, but the dilemma is that the sciences have really been split into very fine pieces, and applied sciences have, as we all know, gotten a little bit the short end of the stick recently, and so our country is probably the best in the world, arguably at pure science generation, and you could count us in the bottom tier of most of applications. So we've got a lot of catching up. The glass half full version of that is that there's just tons of stuff sitting on the plate waiting for university departments to be able to put into things like a geodesign program. And so I taught a 12-week course at MIT on planning support systems, and we did a different type of system every week. Once actually it was a 14-week course. It was once in domestic application and once in international. So we took on erosion and soils in a U.S. context and said, here's the U.S. national databases for soils. Here's the fundamentals of how it works. Here's how you compute in the U.S. what's going on. And then we took it to an international destination, the low data version, and said, all right, you've got only terrain from 90-meter satellite and an ortho photo. And you're going to have to interpret the soils, and you're going to have to then figure it out from that. And we went through 7 systems that way. And so it was a purposely synthetic course. And that was a biophysical example. We also did social equity. So I think that a geodesign program is a great opportunity to bring to the table a lot of the depth of the faculty of a university. That is the advantage of a university. You've got those faculty, and you just need a venue to bring them together. And by the way, their job is not to convince their majors, so to speak. It's to convince the non-majors. So to put it in faculty terminology, it's like teaching a lecture to a non-major. But these are people that are going to be implementing stuff based on what you're teaching them. So it's reasonably motivating for the faculty from that perspective. That, for instance, the design professionals, let's take the prior example, soil scientists want designers and planners to know something about soils because they feel it gutturally when we massacre them. So, so there's, it's of course always difficult to organize within a university, but I think the brand of geodesign is a useful construct for that. And I don't know if it's Jack Dangermond's subversive plot to reintroduce geography into the curriculum, but I've always thought that it's something universities could do really well. And it has to be separated from the science funding stream to some extent. But I think not entirely, because you get from the applied sciences real problems that then need actual science to go figure out what building foundation does to soils. And so you get applied research problems out of that. It's not a one-way pipeline from science.
I should. Thanks very much for your input. Continue.